Good afternoon, class. Today I'm super excited. We are going on a virtual field trip. Today we are going on a virtual field trip to Gary Melcher's home and studio. I'm super excited about this trip because I actually used to work here, so I'm excited to share some information with you that I learned when I was a docent there. However, I am having technical difficulties today, so you will not see me. However, I promise there are a lot of visuals here, so you will not miss me too much today. But this is actually the house itself. There's also an adjacent studio that we're going to be looking a lot at today, but this just gives you a visual about what it looks like that you could maybe go visit in person someday after COVID. Actually, Gary Melcher's? That's a great question that I had when I first started at the Gary Melcher's home and studio. This is Gary Melcher's right here, and we're going to be learning a lot about him today. So remember his face because you might see him in paintings later too. He was an American artist who focused a lot on naturalism, so more realistic paintings, and he really was popular during his time, the early 1900s into the mid 1900s before he passed away. And we're going to be learning a lot about him today. So I'm excited to share information with you today. And we're going to start with his early childhood. So here we are in this studio, and we're going to be looking at a lot of paintings today, like the one right here. However, we're going to focus right on this little area right here. If you look at the paintings closely, they look pretty skilled, like he maybe worked on them later in life when he was a skilled artist. However, these actually are done when he was quite young. Gary Melchers was born in Detroit in 1860, but actually never really struggled as a starving artist. He trained with his dad at a young age and was instructed by him. His dad was a sculptor. If you look closely here, this is Gary at a young age. And later, when he was 17, he was lucky enough to be sent to Dusseldorf, Germany to receive a formal education in art. And that's where a lot of these different sketches and paintings come from, his early experience as an artist. And if you look quite closely, he was quite skilled at his age. He would later go to Paris when he was 21 to get a better experience. However, his time in Germany really shaped him as an artist, especially with working with the Dutch, which you can kind of see some of the windmills here, and this space right here, which I think you should remember because we're about to go see a painting that she might be in, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the impact the Dutch had on him. So here we jump over here and we see a huge painting right here, and if you look closely, you can see that face that we just saw over there. With George Hitchcock, which is another famous artist that you may have heard of, Gary painted the naturalist style quite often by painting the Dutch. He used them quite often as a model. We're going to look closer at this painting here, right here. It's titled In Holland. A lot of times Gary is seen working with more naturalist paintings, and he uses a lot of women models. So here he is in Holland painting, and you can see the realistic detail of the flowers and the model that he's using, and the windmill in the background. He would use his experience with the Dutch later in life to continue to paint more naturalist painting. That's what he was most interested in, and that's what he became most popularly known for. We'll go look at one more painting that he painted with the Dutch here in 1 second. If you look here, here's another model of a Dutch woman in the fields, kind of relaxing, and once again gives a sense for the naturalist feeling that Gary Melchers went for as an artist in his early time, that would continue later in his life as well. A little bit about Gary Melchers today, and he's a very important artist to remember. However, there's someone else I want to bring up today, and it's this woman right here. This is Gary Melchers' wife, Corinne. They met on the board of ship when she was an art student. She was about 21 and they fell in love, but she was an artist herself. You can see her modeled in quite a few of his paintings, and I will point that out to you in a second, but I want to point out that she was also an artist alongside of Gary Melchers, and some of her work can be seen at the museum too. 1 second, I will show you one of those pictures. An example of Corinne Melchers' work. It's very similar to her husband Gary's as well, but it is quite skilled, to point out that she was an art student in the past. However, one of her mostly skilled paintings that we have in the collection would be this painting of Gary Melchers himself. This is quite a skilled painting because if you look closely, she's painting a painting within a painting and him painting. So it's quite an illusion itself. Um, Now we're not sure why maybe she didn't paint more like Gary Melchers did. There's a few speculations. However, because she was running the house after she got married, she didn't have as much time as Gary did, and she was quite supportive of his time. However, it's very important to remember that she was also an artist herself. Gary and Corinne stayed married until Gary's death in 1942. However, she was used as quite a art subject in his paintings himself. And this is another example of her sitting at Falmouth at the Belmont Estate sewing. However, there's something very important to point out with Corinne, and that is that she had an influence in Gary Melchers' artwork with his later work in his life, and I'll point that out in another painting. Marrying Corinne, Gary focused a lot on naturalist painting. However, it was seen after marrying Corinne that he focused a lot on painting women and child, and that's why a lot of his subjects are women and children later in life. Here's an example right here. But if you look here, here's another example of painting home life with women. And here's another example of his Dutch work right here, The Bride, which is quite a popular piece. But once again, here's another home life piece. Corinne definitely had an impact in his life and how he painted after they got married, and that's something else that I like to point out. Belmont, that's a very important thing to point out too, because this is where Gary Melchers' home and studio is. Belmont was his second home. He also had a home in New York. It was located in Stafford County, and at the time Stafford County was a quiet farm town life. And so he really liked it there and settled quite nicely in there. And you would see later influences of that in his work, and we're going to point out some of those here. He paints quite a lot of scenes from Stafford County within his paint work. Here's an example right here of a art piece of a race that was a horse race that was going on in Stafford County. And actually, some fun fact, some of these names on this board right here, some family members still visit to this day and can point out their family name on this picture. But Gary Melchers definitely used Belmont a lot for some of his naturalist paintings later in life. He built his studio in 1924 there, and he would paint quite a lot of scenes from Belmont. Here's an example right here, and then here's another example of him painting through Belmont as well. Then, if you remember earlier, I showed you this painting. This is another example. This is Corinne Melchers' actual china, and these are models that just came into his home that he painted as well. Great example of what Stafford County used to look like from the view of Belmont at the time. Obviously now there's a busy bridge and everything. Some of these houses still remain, but this is how rural Stafford County looked at his time, which obviously would have interested Gary Melchers because of the different naturalistic elements that it offered. Studio that I was talking about that Gary Melchers built, and it looks as if like he just left it. When he passed away, Corinne lived in the house until she passed away, and then she gave the studio and house to the state of Virginia to open as a museum, and that's what it is today. We have lots of collections of his paintings. However, I think the coolest part is looking at like he just left. If you look closely right here, oh, sorry about that. If you look closely in the area right here, it's almost like you just left and was going to come back and paint later. There's still palettes of paint there and everything like that. Now that you know who Gary Melchers is, you can maybe find some of his pieces throughout different museums. For instance, The Bride right here is located at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. He actually has a few paintings in the National Portrait Gallery Museum in DC as well, because he helped found that museum. However, you can definitely spot his work with the naturalistic tones, the Dutch work, and American artist that he was. So now when you go to your next museum, keep an eye out for Gary Melchers. Thank you so much for touring with me today. If you are interested in looking more of his pieces of work, you can go to museum.com, and you can check out a virtual tour of the studio that we toured today. And you can also tour the historic house and the museum store if you're really interested. And thank you so much, and I'm excited to do another virtual field trip with you in the future.